for you. Ma'am.
U.S. Assistant Secretary for Near Eastern Affairs Ann Patterson said at a hearing in the House on Wednesday, up to 90% of Russian strikes in Syria have hit the moderate Syrian opposition. During the same hearing, she said, quote, "The Nusra Front, which is an al-Qaeda affiliate, has absorbed the various moderate groups, have absorbed a number of what we would previously call the moderate opposition," end of quote. How certain are you of this definition of moderate Syrian opposition when you have such migration from moderates to terrorists?
Say that last part again, about
How
al-Nusra?
certain?
No. She said,
So, quote, "The Nusra Front, which is an al-Qaeda affiliate, has absorbed the various moderate groups, have absorbed a number of what we would previously call the moderate opposition."
Okay, I got you. Yeah. Well, we certainly agree completely with what Assistant Secretary Patterson said, and we've talked about this before a couple of ways. The opposition groups, as you know, are not all united. They don't all share the same goals. Membership is a fluid thing. It's not like they all carry identification cards and have matching ties and that kind of thing. And people do kind of come and go. And we have seen that over the course of the last year. Some moderates become extreme. One of the things that so deeply concerns us about ISIL and its ability to stay resilient is the resilience itself of the ideology and the attractiveness of it. And it shouldn't be far-fetched to anyone that a fighter in Syria, a member of an opposition group, could find him or herself attracted to this ideology. It doesn't mean we like to see that. Obviously, we don't. But it is something of concern. I mean, when young middle class or upper class educated young people in Europe who have bright futures ahead of them find themselves, actually not just Europe, but all around the world, even here in the United States, some of them find themselves attracted to this bitter, ugly ideology and to this fight. So if it can happen to people in Europe, in the United States, and Australia, it shouldn't come as a shock to anybody that it could happen to people on the ground there in Syria. Again, not that we turn a blind eye to it. Hang on a second.
Sure. Not
that we turn a blind eye to it, or it's not important, but we recognize that it happened. We don't believe, and I think her comment bears this out, that it's happening to the great majority of moderate opposition fighters. It happens to some. We understand that. It also doesn't mean that we're going to turn our back on supporting those fighters in Syria who are proving effective at going after ISIL. We still have every intention of supporting them. In fact, increasing our support to them.
You use the word fluid, and yet the U.S. assigns a certain percentage to Russian strikes, which indicates that the U.S. knows for certain who is who on the ground. Is that the case?
We have a very good idea. I mean, if your question is that certain individuals from an opposition group find themselves attracted to ISIL or al-Nusra and become extreme and go fight with them, that there's a pretty long leap you're making there if you're saying that we're seeing some individual fighters become extreme to it's so fluid and so mixed that we have no idea who's where and who's doing what.
I will explain what's confusing about. On the one hand, U.S. officials sound very definitive and certain when they talk about who Russia is targeting. On the other hand, we hear U.S. officials say, "Oh, it's so difficult to identify who modern Syrian rebels are." We've heard Ash Carter testify to that effect. Joe Biden spoke about that, and Patterson is talking about moderates migrating, to terrorists. U.S. officials have actually been critical of this definition of moderate Syrian opposition, but the label suddenly becomes solid when the conversation is about Russia. How can U.S. officials be so certain and so doubtful about the same thing at the same time?
Well, I take issue with your implication that we don't know, and that we're that we're somehow conflating the two. We're not. I think you are. The fact that there are some opposition members that become extreme is not a new idea. We've been talking about this for more than a year. Okay? Doesn't mean that the opposition groups still don't exist. Doesn't mean that we don't have an idea of where they are and what they're doing, because obviously we're supporting them, some cases with airstrikes against ISIL. So we have a pretty good idea of who we can work with on the ground and who we can't, and who we can support and who we probably shouldn't. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been doing more than 2,000 airstrikes in Syria, and we wouldn't be committed to increasing support to counter ISIL fighters on the ground in Syria. So we have a very good idea. We also have a very good idea of where Russian military aircraft are conducting their strikes and who they are targeting. And it is 80 to 90% against opposition groups. The two are perfectly distinct and clear, and we're just as sure about both.
Several months ago,
I'm going to give you one more shot. Go ahead.
Several months ago, Ash Carter said it is difficult to identify about the training and equipping program. It is difficult to identify people with.
But that's a completely different issue.
What has it suddenly become easier to identify them and find them?
There's been no change in terms of our knowledge of who we think we can work with on the ground and who we can't in terms of supporting their fight against ISIL. You're talking about a train and equip program that was vetting individuals. So now, once again, you're taking an aggregate discussion about groups and where they are and what they're doing against ISIL, and you want to boil it all down to individuals. And I'm just challenging the premise of your entire question, which I just think is bogus. These are individuals, and we did admit to having problems in vetting certain individuals. But we're talking about groups and groups that are in the fight against ISIL. And yeah, we have a pretty good idea of who they are, where they are, and what they're doing. Does it mean that even those groups may have one or two or a dozen guys splinter off out of frustration or fear or intimidation and go fight and become extreme with ISIL or al-Nusra? Yeah, that sometimes happens. It's a very fluid situation there. But let me make it perfectly clear. We know exactly where Russian military aircraft are operating, and we know exactly what they're hitting, and they're not spending anywhere near the bulk of their time against ISIL. And if they want to do that, if that's a desire, if that's where they want to go, then as I've said before, the United States stands ready to have that conversation with them.
And you know exactly where the moderate Syrian rebels are? Are you telling the Russians where they are?
I think I've dealt with your line of questioning. We know where they are. We know who they're fighting.
Are you telling Russia about this? Don't hit. This is where they are.
There's no coordination with the Russian military in Syria. We've talked about this before as well. It exists at a deconfliction level, tactical, so that that professional airmanship can be observed, and we have and there's safety of flight. But there's no coordination.
What prevents the U.S. from telling Russia, here is where the moderate Syrian rebels are, don't hit them?
Well, it's difficult to get to that level of discussion. It's difficult to agree on those kinds of things, like sharing information, actual information, when you don't share outcomes. And it's clear that from a military perspective, we do not share the same outcome with Russia on ISIL. You can't get there from where we are today. Ma'am, Nicole?